Hey folks, James Abrinio coming to you from Abrinio Cho, your Northern Virginia personal injury and criminal defense law firm. Today I wanted to take a moment to discuss a recent case, a recent very tragic case. Apparently a woman was hit by a driver that then left the scene, and as she laid in the ground, law enforcement coming to her aid tragically ran over her. This is just a horrific case. I figured it would be an important discussion for you and the public to kind of understand a little bit better about what's going on. So first of all, I'm going to play the video of a Fox News report discussing it, and then we can get into a little more details about what we should be thinking about, and particularly as it comes to Virginia law. So let me just play this, and then we'll go.
Hey, Kenneth, good evening. So this video is tough to watch and also listen to. We'll show it to you in a second, but you will see the moment a Fairfax County Police cruiser drives over 62-year-old Trina Jones, who was lying in the street waiting for help.
Please don't tell me I just ran her over.
You can hear the Fairfax County Police officer say something along the lines of, "Please don't tell me I just ran over her." That officer, 2-year veteran Jalen Phillips, is now on restricted duty status as the department investigates this fatal hit and run that happened just before 9 p.m. on the night of September 23rd. Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis says his officer was driving between 14 to 17 miles per hour at the time of the accident. He confirms that Miss Jones was also alive before the officer ran over her. We had a chance to speak with her attorney, David Haynes, who says this is a tragedy.
Watching the video, it's very clear that the view was completely unobstructed from this young officer as he approached the scene. He knew exactly where the intersection was. She had been in the crosswalk. That's clear when she had been struck the first time, which was, looks to be a fairly modest strike. The video tells the story that this was a preventable loss of life at the hands of those who were hired to protect us.
And you can even hear audibly the police officer say something to the effect that, "Please don't tell me that I just hit her." So that is a spontaneous comment by him. Certainly there was no intent on his part to make contact with another human being in the roadway.
So right now on your screen is the black Mercedes that Fairfax County Police, they were looking for as of maybe 2 hours ago, but we are now learning, as we shared off the top, that with the help of Manassas Park Police, that car has been located. Right now, Fairfax Police says they are currently trying to find the driver of this car to have a conversation with them. Chief Davis also mentioned in this presser that this could go a number of ways. They need to speak to this person to see if they even knew that they hit Miss Jones, but police were really emphasizing that when they get a chance to look at the car and evaluate the damage, that's what will let them know. When asked, what kind of charges could the driver of this car face, Chief Davis says as of right now, it would just be leaving the scene of a crime.
So obviously just a tragic circumstances to be talking about this morning. This apparently happened back in September 9th. It only got on my radar just yesterday when I saw a report on it. Not quite sure. I just didn't happen to see it. And I guess now the investigation has heated up. But I figured to talk about this complicated case, it was easier just to do a quick PowerPoint just to help me organize my thoughts and hopefully help you if you care to follow along. So I just created a quick PowerPoint. So let's just kind of start talking through it. So a few things to think about at the beginning. First of all, facts are still being investigated, so things can change very quickly. We heard from the police chief. Apparently there has been some investigation, but clearly there's a lot to be learned. Particularly when it comes to the initial vehicle, the black Mercedes, it appears that hit the driver. That hit the pedestrian, Miss Jones. So we're not quite sure the circumstances under which the initial strike occurred. We're obviously still learning about what the officer was doing when the crash occurred. The video, surveillance video, the cruiser video does provide a lot of useful information in trying to understand what the officer saw, how fast the officer was going, what he was thinking, that kind of thing. But there's still a lot of information to know about what was happening there. I mean, what was going on through his mind? Is there reasons that maybe he's looking away from the intersection? Was there reasons he didn't see her? What kind of clothes was she wearing? What was going on? What was being communicated aside from that? I know there is some discussion about Miss Jones being conscious in that intersection. There were some reports I saw, some folks may have been trying to get her out of the intersection. And again, there were some responses about her saying, no, I'm just going to wait until law enforcement gets there. That can have huge impacts, as we'll talk about in a bit. But there's just a lot of facts to be known. But again, the video does lay out a lot of information there. And I will say, whenever law enforcement is being investigated, but with any investigation, frankly, these things can take time. There are police reports, there's witness statements, there may be other video, maybe somebody with their cell phone cameras got it out. Maybe there's already other law enforcement on the scene that have body cam. So there's still a lot to be known. So just keep that in mind as we as the community try to figure out what's happening. I did want to put there, my firm has nothing to do with this case. You saw the lawyer for Miss Jones's family. I guess it's from the Cochran firm. I think that's actually from the renowned Johnny Cochran, the late Johnny Cochran. I know they've got a big firm, and I think they've got offices here in DC and Virginia. So my firm has nothing to do with it. I just saw this horrific case is an opportunity for us as the public to learn. Maybe you can learn a little bit more about Virginia law. Maybe it helps you if you need it, but also maybe it helps you behave differently and be a bit more safe. Next point I did want to make, obviously, these are horrific circumstances. There is no doubt somebody has been killed tragically. That means family members are going to be reeling from the loss of her life, her own life. I think she's 62 years old. That's pretty young nowadays. And it's just horrific whenever you see things like this happen. I will say, from the law enforcement officer's point of view, look, I am the first to be as critical as possible against law enforcement. I do criminal defense. Also, in my personal injury cases, I see a lot of times law enforcement's helpful. Sometimes they're not so helpful and they can be difficult. But, you know, I think, at least from the statement you heard from the video, it's not something where this individual intended. And there's a difference between an accident and a horrific accident, and an accident that is not acceptable versus an actual intentional crime, meaning trying to kill somebody. It's clear that officer was not trying to do this. And no matter what happens, whether or not he loses his job, whether or not he's charged with a crime, whether or not he's sued and all that kind of stuff, his life obviously will be forever changed as well. But obviously not trying to equate that to what this family is going through and what this victim, Miss Jones, suffered, because that's just horrific. It's just horrific all around. Also, I did want to clarify, this is a very complicated case. There's a lot of nuance to be discussed. There's not a lot of facts to be understood. There's a lot of complicated law around it, and we'll talk about it in a moment. But so just keep that in mind. Again, this video is not meant to provide every single instance of thought involved. I'm not handling the case. It's just a few things that I think the public should consider as they're considering this case. So whenever there's an accident involved, whenever there's a car crash, particularly Virginia law, when it comes to Virginia law, there's really two aspects to be thinking about. There's the civil law, so money and that kind of thing. And then there's the criminal law, criminal traffic. Is somebody charged with a crime or charged with a traffic offense? Is there fines or there punishments, those kinds of things? So you have the criminal justice system on one side and you have the civil justice on one side. So I figured, I do both. My firm handles both injury victims that are hurt in car accident cases, sexual assaults, things like that, medical malpractice. But we also defend folks that are charged with crime. So I figured this case to me, at least the civil side was a bit more compelling, because I think that's probably where people are going to have a lot more questions to be thinking about. And obviously the law is just something that's a bit confusing to people. So first point I have there, and I just want to highlight this: hit and run. If you cause an accident, somebody's injured, and you leave the scene of the accident, that is a felony. That is a very serious crime. And you always stop at a car accident if you caused the crash. Doesn't mean that you have to admit to everything. Doesn't mean you have to talk to law enforcement, but stop there. Make sure you can give your information. If you need to render aid, there's obligations under Virginia law. If you have caused an accident, that you're required to render aid. So inherently, if you leave the scene of an accident where you know or should have known somebody was injured, it's a felony. Question here is about whether they knew or didn't know. I think the reporter also said that right now it's only hit and run, and the investigators look, there could be some other charges coming out of this. It's just too early to really tell. On the civil side, though, I have pointed out here, it's a wrongful death claim. And what is, let me back up a little bit. What is a wrongful death, right? Wrongful death claim. So if you are injured in an accident, okay, and you suffer injuries, you have your own personal injury claim. You have claim for pain, suffering, lost wages, medical bills, inconvenience. If you are killed, that the family typically has really two options to pursue a claim. There is a survival claim. So that's essentially the family stepping into that injured party's injuries that we just talked about if you are still alive. But then there's also wrongful death. And I think this is probably going to be a wrongful death claim. This is not something where somebody suffered long-term pain and suffering. This is apparently a quick death, tragic again. But wrongful death claim is really the family's claim for loss of that individual that has very specific prongs and all that. So that's the nature that this claim should be, essentially the family's loss, whether it's loss of love and all that, and loss of income, things like that. So it's just something to be thinking about that the family will have to decide, but probably wrongful death. I do want to be clear. Civil law is very different than criminal law. And civil law in a lot of ways can be very archaic. It can be very unforgiving. So a few things that I'll be talking about in a moment, you may very well be very surprised about, because when accidents happen, frankly, you're probably going to be surprised when I talk about the criminal aspects of this case as well. But on the civil side, you're going to be very surprised about. Don't blame me. I'm the messenger. Again, I represent injury victims. I'm not a fan of any of this stuff. In fact, if I had more say, then we'd be changing some laws, but we are where we're at. So let's get on to the next discussion, and we're going to be talking about governmental immunity. And why am I talking about governmental immunity? Well, here, a law enforcement officer, a government actor, caused the death. So the question will be for the family, assuming they're bringing a wrongful death claim, or let's say they choose a survival claim, can they pursue a claim against the government actor, and can they be successful? And when we're talking about claims for civil claims, we're not talking about, bringing back life. We're not talking about taking away people's pains. We're talking about trying to put compensation in the pockets of family members for the loss of that individual. In a civil trial, a lot of times insurance defense attorneys will make the argument that, the families are bringing this claim, the plaintiffs are bringing this claim. It's just money, right? Money can't bring back life. And they use that as a way to defend why a jury should not award a lot of money. Well, money is all we have here in this circumstance. That's all you can do is try to give money. So when you're thinking about that, with the civil justice system, it awards money to compensate injury victims. It also awards money to send a message to the community. So the first question is whenever you have a civil lawsuit, is can the plaintiff, the victim, or the victim's family be successful against the defendant and their insurers? Really, we're talking about insurance money. And so the plaintiff will obviously want the best avenue and easiest avenue of being compensated. The defendant will want to be insulated from civil liability. And when it comes to government actors, governmental immunity is a huge thing. Essentially, it insulates, in certain circumstances, it insulates government actors from civil liability. So here it may insulate, and let me back that up, may insulate the law enforcement officer from civil liability. And really what that means, and look, I think the public, especially, you hear the difference between, I was a big advocate, and I still am a big advocate of civil justice reform and criminal justice reform. And one of the things that I've never been a fan of is governmental immunity. And a lot of times the public, the media will paint it as if you get rid of civil immunity and all of a sudden officers are going to be paying judgments out of pocket. The reality is most times the insurance companies are covering law enforcement, are paying for law enforcement judgment, for prosecutor misdeeds, things like that. Does that come from taxpayer dollars? Depends on the jurisdiction. Sometimes it does. Obviously, even if an insurance company is providing policy coverage, taxpayer dollars go to premium. So understand that. But so a lot of times money comes from insurers and taxpayer dollars. But that's just like any civil case. So if you cause a car crash, assuming you have insurance, which you should, I'm begging you to check your policy. If at all possible, get $1 million of coverage in case you accidentally cause somebody's injury. But you want there to be coverage there for victims. But my point is, you hear a lot in the media about we cannot limit civil liability, governmental immunity, because you don't want individual officers to be paying out of pocket. No, what it compels is a discussion about insuring government actors and having proper insurance. So if there are claims that victims can be paid, and yes, there will be political consequences likely because premiums go up and things like that, but that's what you want. But do not be led to believe that, law enforcement officers won't ever work again, or nobody will apply to be a law enforcement officer because they're worried about getting sued. It's just like lawyers. We can get sued. We have insurance policies. Doctors, they can get sued. They have insurance policies. It just means you get proper insurance and the public better understand insurance. And sure, maybe some law enforcement won't want to apply because they're worried about getting sued, but a lot of times it's because they misunderstand what insurance is and how it works. And I think the media plays into that. So just keep that in mind. And I do want to make sure that's, that being said, so if law enforcement is protected from civil liability, from governmental immunity, let's say the court says this officer is protected by governmental immunity. Governmental immunity doesn't mean that you can simply not win against government actors unless there's some type of absolute governmental immunity. For cases like this, we're not talking about absolute governmental immunity. We're talking about immunity for actions so long as they don't constitute gross negligence. Now, you may be asking, what is gross negligence? Now, that is where, from a practical standpoint, to reach gross negligence, you got to get really high. The bar in our Virginia Supreme Court, the highest court, appellate court in our state, sort of like the Supreme Court of the United States, our state Supreme Court has set gross negligence. The standard of reach there is so high that in a lot of ways it's virtually impossible to meet. Okay. There is a case that's pretty famous, the Boy Scouts of America case, where and I'm going to be oversimplifying here, but I urge you to take a look at it. And I'm forgetting the case name. If you want to reach out, I can find that for you. But effectively, it said that the Boy Scouts were immune from civil liability when a scout leader decided that they were going to take their troop across a moving body of water. I think it was a creek or a river. And one of the scouts, the scout leader, knew that kid could not swim. And despite that, directed the kids to go across the river. Of course, tragically, this young child is swept up, and then the scout leader dives in to try to save him, and it was just too late. And the court there said that that's not gross negligence because he took some effort of safety. And I'm forgetting the exact language, but some effort of safety by going and trying to save him, which I disagree with. And to me, it's just clear gross negligence. But it's just something that you need to be thinking about when you're looking at gross negligence. But also, if sovereign or governmental immunity applies here, then the ability for the family to hold this officer civilly liable and therefore really seek compensation is going to be limited. Now, there are other means by which government actors pay victims, and sometimes it's political. This is obviously a very political case because it's well known enough that you're seeing on local news channels. I wouldn't be surprised at some point you saw it on Today's Show. So I imagine this case is going to get a lot of coverage, and sometimes payouts will be made from the political pressure. But when we're looking purely at the law, gross negligence is a hard one to get around. So if the victim, if the county here, Fairfax County, is able to convince a court that gross negligence should apply if it ever gets in litigation, it may never get in litigation, but if it ever gets in litigation, then that's a heavy burden to lift. Now, that doesn't mean it always applies, and there's a lot of issues. And again, when I'm talking about this video being oversimplified, when we talk about governmental immunity, it is a hugely complicated area of law. There are a lot of things to think about, but oftentimes the issue comes down to whether or not that government actor here, law enforcement officer, is behaving using discretionary actions versus ministerial actions. So discretionary means, and really kind of stepping back, the point of governmental immunity in theory was to make sure that the government could operate without being sued out of existence. Again, I disagree with that, but that's just the notion of what it comes from. And so discretionary versus ministerial, really what the governmental immunity is saying is we want our government actors to be able to use their governmental discretion, meaning the important function that they serve and making these important governmental decisions. We want to have them to use them without being worried about getting sued. So if government actors' action that led to a death or an injury was a discretionary action using their governmental discretion, they're going to get insulated more. There's going to likely be governmental immunity, and therefore the only way you can pierce that immunity is showing gross negligence. As opposed to that is ministerial. Ministerial is really, you kind of just licking the envelopes and then moving the envelope across. It's things that you're not doing above anything ordinary that we as humans do. Okay, we as citizens do. And so let me move on to give you a few examples. And these are kind of the traditional ones. The first is discretionary when you think about police chases. So let's say a bank robber is getting away. I know the Lou just got robbed in Paris. Law enforcement's chasing that person down. Here, a bank robbery happens, Fairfax Corner. I don't know if there's a bank there, but let's say what's over there, Ruth's Chris gets robbed, and then police are on the tail to catch the bad guy. The case law has made it pretty clear that the officer chasing that person, trying to use their law enforcement powers to catch that individual, is discretionary because the way they drive and the way they're navigating through intersections and things like that, the way that they're using a pit maneuver to try to get the guy over, those kinds of things, that is discretionary. That is really something you need experts using their knowledge to do. So you want to give them some protection, especially in emergency circumstances. And that's obviously another aspect of this, is whether it's an emergency. But again, I don't want to get into too much of the detail, but for purpose of this, we're going to just talk about discretionary action. That's versus ministerial action. And there's cases where there's one pretty famous case where a law enforcement officer was driving inmates, I think from court to the jail, or maybe jail to the court. I can't remember exactly, but he's just driving down the road and then just rear-ended somebody, just like a normal car crash. And the court there said that was ministerial because he was not engaged in any other activity that was any more complex than the average citizen would be. I think their argument was, though, well, we've got inmates in the back and therefore, we've got to be paying attention. But the court went through a very complex analysis and essentially said, well, at that moment, it's not like the inmates were trying to break out and therefore the accident caused because of something you were doing that required discretionary function. You're just driving down the road. Now, so as you can see, those are kind of the two ends of the spectrum. And this case is a little bit is very different because in a lot of ways, the law enforcement officer is coming to the scene of the accident, investigating a hit and run and trying to come to the aid of somebody that's been a victim. And there's a lot of discretion that can be argued there. I think they had their lights on and all those kinds of things, but that's where I'm saying there's still a lot of facts to be understood. We don't know what was happening leading up to him getting to the intersection. We don't know what kind of communications he was having, things that would kind of put it more in that discretionary behavior. We don't know if, is there an argument that it's emergency right now because Miss Jones was literally in critical condition, or did she just break an ankle? We don't know. These are very sensitive questions to ask, which we don't know. And they're going to argue, obviously, if it gets in litigation, it was ministerial. He was just navigating through an intersection. And again, these are facts to be litigated and, of course, to be considered if getting there. But, his law enforcement, the Miss Jones's family's attorney seems like he knows what he's talking about. He was properly advocating for his client, pointing out that, there was nothing obstructing the officer's view, and this was just horrific. One case that I'm sure he's probably looked at it already, but this Lake versus Mitchell, 77 Virginia Circuit 14, this is out of Prince George's County, 2008, where the court ended up saying that it was not discretionary and no governmental immunity, that the officer was just driving 20 miles over the speed limit and caused a crash. So that was one case. And again, this video, I haven't done an in-depth research on this particular fact, so I was just trying to get some content out for you guys to consider real quick. But this goes beyond the weeds. But just if you're curious, that's an interesting case to look at. Whether or not this case, whether or not governmental immunity applies, in my view, right now, it's just not clear. I've got arguments for and against. I think more so right now as we're sitting here, governmental immunity should not apply, but also I'm pretty biased too. But again, I can also argue the other side. So it's just going to be something that needs to be sorted out. And there's still, again, a lot of facts to be discovered. Now, and actually, let me go back because I think I might have missed one. I did. So one of the other things that I did not put in this outline that is surprising to a lot of people. Okay, and I just want to be clear about this. Let me take my PowerPoint down for a second. In addition, if the county is trying to defend this case, there's other aspects of Virginia civil law that are truly archaic that they may try to employ if they end up getting litigation. And one is contributory negligence, assumption of the risk. What is contributory negligence? Contributory negligence says that if the defendant, the person that injured you or killed you, is 99% at fault and you are just 1% at fault, you lose. You are barred from recovery. Same thing goes if it's the family of a decedent, somebody that died here, Miss Jones's family. If a judge or a jury would find that she was just 1% at fault and or she assumed the risk meaning you knew that it was dangerous and you took that risk anyway, they lose, okay? And when I heard reports, and again, it's still not quite sure exactly what happened, but there are some witness reports stating that she was injured and folks near the scene were saying for her or trying to assist her out of the roadway, but she said something to the fact of, I'm just going to wait for the officer to get there. I don't know what her mental state was. I don't know the truth of those statements. Maybe somebody's misrepresenting it. Maybe, a publicist is trying to put the Fairfax County position in a better light. That's been known to happen, not by Fairfax, but just in general. I think we've all seen misreports in order to benefit investigations. So I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know if she was in the physical ability to respond or hear. But if a judge were to find that she voluntarily stayed in the street waiting for law enforcement, and it was some period of time, there's an argument for contributory negligence. There's an argument for assumption of risk. I don't agree with it. I don't like it. I've had many cases where contributory negligence, assumption of risk has really destroyed my client's claims. I think the law should be changed. Most states use something called comparative negligence, where you compare the relative negligences of each party. So if one party's 90% at fault, the defendant is 90% at fault, the victim's 10% at fault, the victim gets 90% of the value, right? That makes a lot of sense. But Virginia has contributory negligence, 1% you lose. So if this thing ever gets litigated, again, politically, it may very well not, because it's risky for police chiefs and sheriffs and board members and the like. But if it ever got litigated, it's something that would need to be considered, and I wouldn't be surprised if an insurance company tried to use it for at least leverage to minimize value to a claim. So that's another thing that you just need to be aware of, is contributory negligence. Now, let's get to the criminal law side. So as we talked about first, hit and run is a felony. So the person that initially hit this person, assuming they knew or should have known that the accident, that they hit somebody and they left the scene, that's a felony. Another thing to consider is involuntary manslaughter. This is really in the context of a car accident case, when your behavior driving is so gross and wanton that shows disregard for human life. That can be a charged crime against the initial driver that caused the accident. Again, we don't know the whole facts here. So there's just a lot to be known. That's just a lot to be known. Now, let's now look at the potential charges against the officer, right? First of all, obviously, hit and run would not apply. He stopped and he was horrified. That's not obviously there. But when I'm thinking about like his behavior, involuntary manslaughter, I watched the video as an attorney for victims, and it is horrific that he missed. At least the cruiser video is horrific that he missed her in the street. It did not look like there was any obstructions to her. Now, the video is obviously it blurred her out, so we didn't see her for family privacy and respect. I totally understand that. Was she wearing all black? I don't know. I don't know. There's just a lot of questions there that I have. But I think it would be hard for a jury to ever find that he was driving so gross and wanton that he was showing disregard for human life. I think the reporter there said he was going 15 to 17 miles an hour. I think the video is pretty consistent with that, maybe a little bit faster. I don't know. But it's not one of these cases where he's, it appears that he's slamming on his gas and speeding through and, disregarding those kinds of things. It's horrific. I don't know that it would ever get to involuntary manslaughter. Now, could it be improper driving, which is a traffic offense? Yes. Now, this is the part of the discussion where I'm upset. I was upset with civil law. Criminal law, a lot of folks can get very upset with as well, because you can have the death of an individual where the person that caused the death, their criminal exposure is relatively minor. So here, when I'm saying, I don't know that this rises to the level of involuntary manslaughter, but it probably rises to like improper driving, failure to pay full-time attention, failure to obey a street light, those kinds of things. But here he's an officer, so that's a little bit different. Regardless, what I'm saying is the behavior here was likely more of a traffic infraction, meaning a finable offense rather than a crime. And the reason I point this out is a lot of times, and I've represented victims of serious injuries, and they're angry because the person only gets charged with failing to obey a highway sign. And how is that possible that my client's life has been severely impacted for the rest of their life and all they get is a fine? I always tell people, look, you have to keep in mind that the criminal justice system is meant to deter criminal behavior, and you have to consider the actual thought process behind their behavior, not ultimately the consequences necessarily. Now, obviously, consequences matter, but you have to be careful about criminalizing behavior that is purely accidental, even if it's a bad accident. Because we all make accidents, and if anytime we're driving down the street and we accidentally rear end somebody, and now we're facing, and it's just an accident, we just misjudged it. and now we could face years in jail for that. Is that really a society that we want to live in? I would think not. And so what the law, honestly, oftentimes is not well suited for when you have situations like this where there are really horrific outcomes and there's really a pull to want justice, but the justice system is just not suited for it. And I always just tell people to always do their best to put themselves in the shoes of the wrongful actor and try to understand what you would want if you were that individual, how you would want the system to treat you. Now, that is never going to never makes my clients feel satisfied from an answer. If I were the victim of one of these tragic circumstances, it wouldn't make me feel better. I just want to be clear about that. I sit here fortunate by God to not have ever had to face something like this. Would I feel very differently if I was a victim? Absolutely. But would I also, as a lawyer, understand the limitations of the criminal law and the criminal system? I don't know if I would understand it, but I would at least intellectually, know what it is. So that is not to justify any of this. Okay. To the extent that if any friend or family member of Miss Jones is ever watching this, I did not mean to minimize what's happening. I did not mean to be cold in the discussion here. Maybe it helped you understand the law a little bit better. So maybe you could give more support and comfort. But again, also, as it says in the corner here, this is not legal advice for anybody. This is for informational purposes only. If you got a case, you got to hire your own attorney and be advised the specific facts of your case. I just thought this case, horrific as it is, it's also important, an educational tool to teach individuals about the law, how it works here, specifically in Virginia. And because I'm from Fairfax, I live in Burke, this is very relevant to me. I'm in Fairfax court all the time. Most of my cases in Fairfax, both civil and criminal. So this is a big deal. And my heart goes out to the family members. It's just horrific. I'm really sorry for your loss. To the law enforcement officer, his life's changed forever too. And again, it's a criminal justice reform guy, it's a criminal defense attorney. I take every opportunity to be as critical as I can, but this is one where, have I been driving down the road and could have easily had something like this happen? Just hard to think about. I hope that I never have to learn it from my personal experience. I hope nobody has to be a victim of my behavior if something like this were to happen. But anyway, look, I hope this video was informational. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Wish everybody the best. Be safe. This is a good example of why you should always make sure you hug your loved ones and be fortunate.